My name is Margaret, and there is one corner of my home that used to hurt more than the rest. Not because it was dark or broken, not because it reminded me of tragedy in an obvious way. It was simply the corner near the front door, the place where life enters and leaves, the place where people come home, the place where shoes are placed without thinking. For years, my husband's shoes sat there. They weren't special shoes. They weren't expensive. They were just his everyday pair. Brown leather, slightly worn at the heel, scuffed on the side where he used to kick them off in a hurry. Sometimes the laces were still tied loosely, as if he might return any minute and slip his feet back inside. And that was the problem. That corner was like a silent lie I allowed myself to believe. Not a lie spoken in words, a lie made of objects and habit, a lie that said he might still walk through that door. When my husband was alive, I never once thought about shoes. They were simply part of life. He would come home, take them off, and call my name. "Margaret," he'd say from the hallway. And even if I was tired, even if the day had been heavy, his voice made the home feel lighter. After he passed, the first weeks were a blur. People came, people cried, people hugged me tightly and promised I would be all right. I nodded like a woman who understood. I thanked them. I accepted casseroles and sympathy cards. I listened to the same words again and again. He's in a better place. He's at peace. He'll always be with you. I didn't argue. I didn't want to. But there was one truth no one could touch for me. The truth that he was not coming back through that door. Still, in the middle of grief, you do strange things. You cling to small details because the big reality is too painful to hold. You leave his jacket on the hook. You keep his favorite mug in the same spot. You don't move his side of the wardrobe, and you certainly don't touch the shoes by the door. At first, it wasn't a choice. It was instinct, like my hands refused to accept the finality of the final chapter. Then months passed, then years, and those shoes stayed. Sometimes I would see them and feel a small sting in my chest like a thorn. Sometimes I would step around them carefully, as if disturbing them would disturb his memory. Sometimes I would dust them lightly, not because I cared about cleanliness, but because it felt like I was still caring for him in a tiny way. People would visit and not notice, or they would notice and look away politely. No one said anything. Perhaps they thought it was too personal. Perhaps they thought it was none of their business. Or perhaps, like most people, they didn't understand that grief lives in objects. My daughter once asked gently, "Mom, do you want me to clear the hallway a little? It feels cluttered." I forced a smile. "No, dear," I said quickly. "It's fine." That word again. Fine. Fine became my shield. But in truth, it wasn't fine. It was frozen. It was me holding on to something I couldn't carry forever. And yet I carried it, because letting go felt like betrayal. People think letting go means forgetting. They think moving an object means moving on emotionally. But for someone like me, those shoes felt like the last physical proof of him. Like if I moved them, he would fade. Like if I put them away, my love would lose its shape. And I wasn't ready for that. Until one morning. It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning that arrives softly. The sunlight was warm on the floor, and my home felt peaceful. I was sitting by the window with tea, watching the street, when I heard a knock at the door. It startled me, because I rarely have visitors unannounced. I stood slowly and went to open it. No one was there, but on the doorstep was a small package, a delivery I had forgotten I ordered. I picked it up and stepped back inside, and as I turned to close the door, my gaze fell on the shoes. That same corner, that same silent waiting. And for the first time, instead of feeling only pain, I felt something else. Tiredness. Not the tiredness of the body, the tiredness of the heart. I stared at the shoes and whispered to myself, "How long are you going to do this, Margaret?" The question landed in my chest like truth. How long? How many years will I keep a pair of shoes by the door like a symbol of a man who cannot return? In that moment, I realized the shoes were no longer comforting me. They were holding me. They were keeping me stuck in the doorway of my own life. I sat down on the hallway chair and looked at them for a long time. The leather looked older now. A thin dust had settled over them. The laces were stiff. Even the shoes had aged in the waiting. And suddenly I felt tears rise, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and unstoppable, because I understood what I was about to do. I was about to give myself permission to move the shoes, permission to breathe again, permission to accept that loving him does not require me to live in permanent waiting. My hands trembled as I reached toward them, and with one slow breath, I touched the leather gently, as if I was touching him, as if I was saying goodbye again. And with one slow breath, I touched the leather gently, as if I was touching him, as if I was saying goodbye again. My fingertips rested on the worn surface, and I felt the memory of his footsteps in my bones. I could almost hear the sound of those shoes crossing the hallway, the little squeak they made on rainy days, the heavier step when he came home tired, the quick shuffle when he was excited about something and couldn't wait to tell me. I sat there on the hallway chair, my knees slightly stiff, my hands trembling as they held on to something that should have been ordinary. But grief turns ordinary objects into sacred ones. I lifted one shoe slowly and held it in both hands. It was heavier than I expected, maybe because it carried so much of him, maybe because it carried so much of me, too, the version of Margaret who used to wait, who used to listen for keys at the door, who used to feel her heart lift when he arrived. I turned the shoe slightly and saw the scuff mark near the toe, the one I always teased him about. "You walk like you're fighting the ground," I used to joke, and he would laugh, shrugging like a man who didn't care about little imperfections. "As long as I get home to you," he'd say. That memory made my throat tighten. I pressed the shoe to my chest, closing my eyes. It felt ridiculous and beautiful at the same time. A 72-year-old woman holding an old shoe like it was a treasure. But in grief, love doesn't always look sensible. Sometimes love looks like this. I opened my eyes and looked down at the other shoes still sitting by the door. For years, the pair looked like a quiet promise. Now they looked like a question. Why are you still waiting? I didn't know how to answer at first. I only knew the truth. I wasn't waiting for him to come back in a real way. I knew death doesn't work like that. But I was waiting in a symbolic way, in the stubborn way of a heart that didn't want to accept the new life it had been forced into. Keeping the shoes there meant I didn't have to fully step into life without him. It meant part of me was still living in the past, still hoping for the familiar rhythm to return. I put the shoe back down gently and wiped my tears with the sleeve of my cardigan. My cheeks felt warm. My eyes stung. My breath came in small, shaky waves. "Robert," I whispered. His name filled the hallway softly. I hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it slipped out like a confession. I stared at the shoes and imagined him standing there, leaning against the wall like he used to, smiling at me with that patient look. And I imagined what he would say if he could see me. He wouldn't want me trapped. He wouldn't want me living in a hallway corner. He would want me to breathe. My eyes filled again, but this time the tears felt less like panic and more like release. I realized grief has stages that don't always happen in the order people expect. You don't just move on like a straight line. You circle back, you carry it. You learn slowly that letting go can happen in tiny moments, not in dramatic decisions. This was one of those moments. I leaned forward and gathered both shoes in my hands, one at a time, treating them with care. My fingers brushed the laces. I felt the dryness of the leather. I noticed the tiny cracks at the edges where time had settled. I stood up slowly, holding the shoes against my chest. For a second I felt dizzy, not physically, but emotionally. It was as if removing them from their place by the door changed the energy of the whole home. The hallway looked empty without them, even though I hadn't placed them anywhere else yet. Empty can be frightening. Empty is where sadness echoes. But then I realized something. Empty can also mean space. Space for breathing. Space for new peace. I walked to the closet where I kept storage boxes. My steps felt slow and sacred. I pulled out a cardboard box that was clean and sturdy, then lined it with a soft cloth from an old drawer. It was a simple cloth, but my heart needed the softness. My heart needed to feel like I was not throwing him away, but resting him. I set the shoes into the box carefully. As I placed them inside, a wave of emotion hit me so hard that I had to pause and sit down on the floor. My knees protested slightly, but I didn't care. I sat there on the hallway rug, staring at the shoes in the box like they were sleeping, and I started talking to him. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a woman speaking to love that doesn't leave. I whispered, "I kept them there. I kept them there because I didn't want to admit you were gone." The tears returned. "I kept them there because I didn't know who I was without you walking through that door. Do you know how frightening that is, to go from being someone's wife every day to being alone?" I swallowed, breathing hard. "I'm sorry, not for loving you, never for that, but I'm sorry I held on in a way that hurt me." I reached into the box and touched the shoes again, fingertips gentle, and I felt the truth in my chest more clearly than ever. Putting them away wasn't betrayal, it was mercy. Mercy for myself, because love does not require suffering. Love does not demand that you live in pain forever to prove it was real. If love is real, it stays even when you change the shape of memory. I looked up at the door, at the space where the shoes used to sit. The corner looked strangely bare, like a stage after the actor has left. And for a moment, my heart panicked. What if putting them away makes him fade? But then another thought arrived immediately, clear and steady. He is not in the shoes. He is in me. That thought made me breathe deeper. I closed the box lid slowly, as if tucking him in. The sound of the lid closing was soft but final. It felt like a small ending. I carried the box into the closet and set it on the shelves carefully, above other memories. I didn't shove it. I didn't hide it. I placed it with respect. Then I returned to the hallway. I stood there staring at the empty corner by the door. The sunlight fell across the floor. Dust floated gently, and the silence felt louder than before. I put my hand over my chest. The pain was there, But so was something else, a quiet release, because for the first time in years, I wasn't living in the doorway of yesterday. I was standing in today, and somehow, unbelievably, I was still breathing. And the hallway looked different now. Not better, not worse, just different, like a room that has been rearranged after a storm. The corner near the door had always held Robert's shoes like a quiet monument. Without them, the space felt bare, almost too honest. At first, honesty hurts. I stood there a long time, staring at the empty floor where the shoes had lived for years. I expected the pain to swallow me whole. I expected guilt. I expected regret. I expected to feel like I had failed him somehow. But instead, something else happened. A memory rose gently, not like a knife, but like a hand. I remembered Robert standing in that hallway one winter evening, stamping snow off his boots, shaking his head with a laugh. "It's freezing out there," he had said, and I teased him for complaining like an old man even when we were younger. He had leaned toward me, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "But it's warm here because of you." That memory warmed me now like sunlight. And I realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't removing him from my home. I was removing the weight of constant waiting from my heart. After I put the shoes away, I expected the day to feel dark. I expected to move through the house like a woman who had broken something sacred. But as I walked back into the living room, the space felt the same. My chair by the window, my small table, my photographs on the shelf. Robert's face in frames still smiled back at me. The world didn't collapse. Only one thing had changed. The pressure in my chest had loosened just slightly. I sat down slowly in my chair. My body felt tired, like I had carried something heavy for miles, even though I had only carried a box into the closet. That is how grief works. It doesn't live in muscles, it lives in meaning. Moving meaning is exhausting. I poured myself fresh tea. My hands were still trembling a little. I watched the steam rise and I listened to the quiet of my home. It was the same quiet I always lived with, but now it didn't feel like waiting quiet. It felt like resting quiet. I thought about the years after Robert passed and how I had treated myself, how I kept the house frozen in certain places like I could preserve him by preserving habits. I kept his mug, I kept his favorite blanket, I kept his side of the closet mostly untouched. I kept the shoes by the door. I did those things because I loved him, but if I'm honest, I also did them because I didn't know how to live without him. Those shoes were not only his memory, they were my fear. Fear of changing, fear of moving forward, fear of life continuing without the person who made it feel complete. And maybe I needed those shoes for a while. Maybe I needed to touch them to survive. Maybe I needed to see them there to believe my love had not vanished. I don't blame myself for that now. I understand. But eventually, the same object that comforts you can begin to trap you, and that is when love must change shape. As evening approached, my daughter called. "Mom," she said, "how are you feeling today?" I almost gave my old answer, fine, always fine, but something about the day made me braver, or maybe softer, and softness can be its own kind of bravery. "I did something today," I told her. She sounded curious immediately. "What did you do?" I paused, my throat tightened. "I put your father's shoes away," I said. Silence. Then I heard her inhale sharply, and her voice trembled. "Mom," I felt tears return. "I know," I whispered. "I know. I didn't think I ever could." My daughter's voice came gentle. "Are you okay?" I looked toward the hallway as if I could still see them there, but the corner was empty. And somehow that emptiness didn't feel cruel anymore. It felt like a clean page. "I'm sad," I admitted, "but I'm also relieved." My daughter's breath shook. "I understand," she said softly. I think your dad would be proud of you." That sentence landed in my heart like a blessing. Proud. Not disappointed, not angry. Proud. After we hung up, I sat quietly again and let the tears come, not in panic, but in tenderness. I realized I wasn't only grieving Robert, I was grieving my old life, the life where two sets of shoes sat by the door, the life where a second voice filled the rooms, the life where someone could say my name like it belonged to them. But grief isn't only about loss. Sometimes it's about love continuing. I stood up and walked to the closet again. I opened it and looked at the box on the shelf. My heart squeezed. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just seeing it there was enough. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't erased. It was simply rested. And I whispered softly, "Thank you." I wasn't sure who I was thanking, Robert, life, or my own tired heart, maybe all of them. That night before bed, I did something else I hadn't done in a long time. I placed a small pair of slippers by the door, not Robert's shoes, not mine from years ago, my slippers, soft, simple, present. It was like telling the hallway, this home still has footsteps, this home still has life, and even though grief lives here, so does peace. If you're listening to my story right now, I want you to hear this gently. Letting go does not mean forgetting. Moving an object does not mean losing love. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give yourself permission to stop suffering in the name of loyalty. You can honor someone and still choose healing. You can remember them and still breathe. You can love them and still live. Later, I sat by my window again, my familiar place, my safe place. Warm light touched my silver hair, and I felt the quiet settle around me like a blanket. I thought about Robert's shoes resting in the closet, and I imagined him smiling, not angry, not sad, just simply loving. And for the first time in years, I let a gentle thought stay in my heart without fear. He is gone, but love remains. I sipped my tea and watched the world outside grow dark. My home behind me was quiet, but not empty. It held memories, and it held me. It held the woman who survived, the woman who loved, the woman who finally gave herself permission. I rested my hands in my lap and let a soft, peaceful smile appear, because after years of waiting, I finally put my husband's shoes away, and in doing so, I let my heart breathe again.